Today, I'm going to talk about why companies can afford to pay devs $192,000, $867 or more every single year and still be profitable. Why are engineers so valuable? How can they afford to pay these engineers so much? And then how can you get a piece of that pie yourself? In today's video, that's exactly what we're going to cover. If you don't know me, my name is Jake. I'm an ex-Amazon engineer, and I'm creating these videos for you for free so I can share exactly what did work, what didn't work, what I'm actively doing to earn over $100,000 a year as a remote front-end developer working in the United States. All right, so if you don't know me, I have a website called frontendfuture.com. If your goal is strictly to break into the industry, switch careers, and start earning this income, you can go ahead and go to that link. There's a free training for you, and you can get started today. Now, let's go ahead and get into the video. In today's video, we're going to cover exactly how much major tech companies are paying for entry-level roles, why and how they can afford to pay so much, as well as how you can position yourself to maximize your income, right? If your goal is strictly to make as much money as possible, if you want to provide for your family, if you want to raise your level of income, if you want to just give yourself a better life, we're going to talk about exactly how you can position yourself to go ahead and maximize that. So let's go ahead and talk about, what are these tech companies paying for entry-level roles? Okay, so one thing that's not included here is if you go to a website called levels.fyi, it actually spells out in detail exactly how much each of these major companies is paying for each pay band, that they're hiring for, that they employ. Okay, so levels.fyi here. And so if we go ahead and go over there, let's look at some of these top companies and what they're actually paying their junior level, their entry level roles, right? So I'm sure you're here on the internet, if you're new to coding or, you maybe been around a little bit and you know that, quote unquote, FANG is the gold standard for engineers. It is the most coveted. It is the highest paying roles that anybody can get in an entry level role. Let's go ahead and look at some of these salaries together and see what's possible. Okay. If we look at Facebook here, they're paying a total compensation of 192 grand out of college, right? Or out of school, out of boot camp, out of whatever, if they're hiring an entry level role, this is what they're paying on average, 140K, 141K base, as well as some stock, as well as some bonus, right? That is what they're paying. Go over here, look at Google, 186K. We look at Microsoft, 164K. Amazon paying 183K directly out of school. And Apple over here paying 179. Look, I don't know about you. I'm not a fancy guy myself. If I was making $180,000 a year, especially straight out of college, I'd be doing just okay. And, 180K can get you a long way in the United States. Even if you're living in a major city or what have you, you got a family, like that can give you a very nice life. Your goal is just to, give yourself, give your wife, give your kids, give your, family maybe a nice life, to go out to eat and whatever, without worrying about the bill. Like this 192K, that can get you a long way. And I share that just to say, like, this is what's possible. If you commit to the next 6 weeks, next 12 weeks, next 18 weeks of learning how to code, breaking into this industry, this is what's possible for you. I mean, just let your mind imagine for a second. What could that do for you? Okay. So that's FANG. That is kind of the S tier of what you're going to be able to earn with no experience. All right. And that is if you are pretty good and you're able to pass technical interviews. All right. Now let's talk about the average entry level suite. All right. So if we go to average entry level software engineer salary here, and we go and look around. So we go click here at ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter is saying, the average entry-level software engineer is making $104,000. So just imagine that, right? You learn how to code. You maybe learn a few languages, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. You learn, maybe a front-end framework like React, or maybe you learn a back-end language like Python. Now, I specialize in front-end. That's what I think is the easiest path to get into the industry. And you start making $100,000 a year. How would that change your life? If you're earning 40K a year, if you're earning 60K a year, 80K a year right now, right? That makes a material difference in your life. Maybe you upgrade your car, maybe you upgrade your house, maybe you send your kids to a private school, maybe like all of a sudden you have some options with what you can do kind of with your life here. So that's what kind of these entry-level roles are paying. At FANG, this is average salary now, talking around the 100K range. And obviously, look, I show you these numbers not to say that everybody is going to make 100K and it's going to happen in 4 weeks and like it's just bing, bada, boom, bang, and everybody makes this money. No, obviously there's variance. Some people make a lot more than that, 190K. Some people make a lot less than, the 100K. But the reality is, if you're going to get into this industry and you're going to call yourself average, right? Some people are going to be better, some people are going to be worse. It's like your average is making 100 grand here. So, if you're on the fence about, oh, is it going to be worth it? Is the reward going to be worth it? Right? Only you can decide that for yourself. But, if 100 grand is significantly more, if it's materially more than what you're making right now, it would be in your best interest to think twice before you, say throw away coding or throw away this opportunity. Because in reality, not only can you earn that money, but a lot of roles will offer remote roles where you can work from anywhere, where you can work from the beach, you can work from the lake house, you can work from wherever it is you want to work. You want to work in a different country? Cool, no problem. Okay, so not only do you get the money, you also get the flexibility. Okay, and in a lot of cases, you're not working more than 40 hours, 50 hours a week, right? Some companies, you may even work 30 or less, right? It really just depends on where you're at. All right, so that is the amazing opportunity that coding offers. All right, so if we want to look at mid-level and beyond roles, we'll just look at some of these top companies, and obviously, if you're watching this, and let's say you don't get hired at one of these top companies or whatever, but like you can adjust this. You can go on Google and actually search these salaries. They're public data here. It's like I'm not making this stuff up, right? So if you look at mid-level at Apple, 259,000, you look at mid-level at Amazon, 285, and so on and so forth. Let alone if you're making, if you make senior level at Facebook, look, $471,000. What would you do with that? What would your family's life look like? I'm sure it'd be look a lot nicer than probably what it is right now. If you're sitting here watching my videos and those numbers mean something to you, it's like that would probably make a material difference in your life, right? This is what's possible with coding. You learn this simple skill sets, and this is what's possible with you or for you in a matter of years. Okay, so that's what's possible. That's what you can actually earn. Now let's talk about why they can afford to pay so much, right? So what you have to understand is with these companies, with your Facebooks, your Amazons, your Googles, your Apples, whatever, or any other normal business out there, there's a reason they can afford to pay so much. It's not a charity. These are businesses. Their goal is to make profit. So how can it be profitable for them to actually pay you so much? The core of the value, right? The main reason that they can pay you so much is because you are tremendously valuable to the business. And how are you valuable to the business? There are two main ways that you're valuable, right? You can either one, cut costs to the business, or two, you can increase revenue, right? So what does cutting costs actually look like? So, if I were to give you an example, let's say, for example, there is a human process in a business. Maybe a human goes and every time the business pays somebody or every time the business needs to collect some money, they have to train a human to go and send an email, to go and follow up with somebody, to go and actually log the transaction in an accounting software. Like those are all business expenses that pile up because you're paying for that labor. Over the course of a year, that might cost you a few $1,000s in labor or, even upwards of $10,000 in labor. If you're able to cut that cost out of a business, save the business 10 grand, over the course of 5-10 years, assuming they automate a few things in the business, like that starts to stack up to more than 100 grand, more than 200 grand, more than 500 grand of savings, right? And so you can see very quickly how, if you are valuable to a business in the sense that you can cut costs tremendously, obviously, if you can save them 100K, of course they'd be willing to pay you 80K. If you can save them 200K, 300K, of course they'd be willing to pay you 100, 200K, right? You are profitable to them. And that is the biggest thing you have to keep in mind when you're going to apply to places, when you're going to ask for salaries or what have you. You have to keep in mind the value that you offer the business. Now, the other way you can contribute value is by increasing revenue directly. What does this actually look like? So let me give you a couple examples, right? Let's say the example of Amazon, all right? Amazon sells physical products on their store and they sell millions of them, probably, I don't know how many they sell a day, but they'd probably turn over millions, if not like hundreds of millions of revenue in a day, right? Probably tens of millions of dollars of revenue a day. If you can increase their conversion rate, or if you can increase their AOV, basically how much a single person spends per transaction on Amazon, 1% difference in that transaction value or conversion rate can translate into millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars for them, right? So one is single engineer's idea. One single engineer's work can contribute just tons and tons and tons of money. All right. And so think about it that way. Like if you can make a business $10 million, it would be a bargain. It would almost be foolish for them not to be willing to pay you 100 grand a year, a measly 100 grand a year if you offer that much value to them. Right. And there's the other perspective of business value where, if you can make a business another 100 grand in EBITDA every single year, when businesses go to sell, when they go to exit and they transfer, say, they sell out to private equity or they sell out to somebody else or they IPO, right? Businesses sell for a multiple of their EBITDA a lot of times, as well as their IP. And there's a bunch of other factors that play in as well. But like, if you can make them another 100 grand profits, that business value goes up by $1 million. It goes up by 2 million. It goes up by 10 million, right? Depending on the multiple of the business, right? And so all of a sudden it makes sense. Like, yeah, they're willing to pay you the salary, But in turn, the founders, the people with actual equity in the business, they can make a lot more money off of your labor. Okay. And so I think the mindset that a lot of engineers lack is that engineer salary and what they can afford to pay you, it's very transactional. Okay. The more valuable you are to the business, the more happy they are to pay you the salary that you're asking for. I think I've beaten a dead horse with business value, but it's in your best interest to align with cutting costs or increasing revenue directly. If you want to maximize the amount of money you make, don't worry about working on stuff you quote unquote want to work on. Don't worry about giving yourself dopamine, working on the fun stuff, whatever. Like, it is in your best interest to maximize business value, and that's going to give you the best opportunity, the most leverage to go and ask for more money, to go and actually earn a higher income. Okay, so that's business value. Let's talk about supply and demand. Okay, engineering. The fact of the matter is, if you look on the internet, you're going to read that, the engineering job market's so tough and software engineering, it's getting replaced by AI and this and that and the other. The reality is, speaking from somebody who's in the industry right now, the market is lacking good talent. Okay, the market is lacking good talent. I speak to employers here, there, and the other, right? They struggle to find good talent. Yes, there's an abundance of mediocre talent. Yes, there's an abundance of garbage talent. But ask yourself, if you're actually going to commit to this, if you're actually going to start coding and you want to go and actually make that salary rates, are you going to be mediocre, or do you want to be good? Do you want to be great and then go and earn a lot of money? Because, if you're willing to be good, put in the time to be good and be great at this, like, you can earn a lot of money. And so there's this supply and demand issue where companies are willing to pay a lot of money, but you have to be good or you have to be great. Okay. And, if you're just mediocre or if you're bad, like, these companies aren't going to be willing to pay you, right? You're definitely not going to land at this FANG here by being mediocre. You're just not going to get into those companies. Okay. And so you have to think about, if these companies struggle to hire good talent, if they're competing for this good or great talents, and you can make yourself, you can contribute to this low supply here, right? You have a much greater chance of paying that higher income. And, that's half the reason these companies can afford to pay, is because they have to, right? If they want good engineers on their team, if they want to make their team better, right, they have to actually be willing to buck up some money to land those good engineers who are actually going to make a difference on this business value here. The third point I want to make is the hidden cost of bad hires. Okay. So this kind of ties into supply versus demand. Now, when a company goes to make a hiring move, especially in the United States, there's all kind of legal documents, procedures, fees, tax events, things like that are incurred when they actually hire a W-2 employee. Okay. And so let's say on average, a business is going to have to pay an entry-level engineer $100,000. Well, in that hiring process, they are spending the recruiter's time. In a lot of cases, there is a kind of a bonus, like a payout fee. If a recruiter, especially a third-party recruiter, lands a candidate, right? If they land an engineering candidate at $100,000, a lot of times, that recruiter will get paid out a quarter year of the salary or somewhere similar to that, right? So immediately they make it $25,000 right there. Okay. And then you got to think about the payroll you're paying the engineer until they get fired. Let's say it's a bad hire, right? Until they get fired. So that engineer, in the 1, 2, 3 months that they're there, and say they suck and they just are wasting time, you're going to have to pay them $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, whatever, just for payroll. Okay. And then there's there's payroll tax. And then you got to think about what kind of drag are they putting on your other engineers? What are you losing in terms of money, in terms of wasted payroll, in terms of wasted productivity from your other engineers that's costing the business even more money? And then you got to think about, what about the bad code they wrote that's causing issues in production, and they're wasting even more of your existing team's, engineering payroll, as well as, let's say they bring your system down and it's wasting time and it's wasting sales, it's causing more sales to not happen and whatever else. A bad engineering hire can cause some serious damage to a business. And so the reason I say that is because it's in the company's best interest not to make a bad engineering hire. And so they're willing to do a lot to ensure that they don't make a bad hire, because it's very, very costly for the business. And so, to avoid making a bad hire, they're willing to go after, better talent that has more experience, that, is a little better at what they do, because they're scared of making a bad hire because it's so costly. Okay. Now, the fourth and final, I include this kind of as an afterthought, but it's actually very important, right? If you're going to a company that already has 5, 6, 8 engineers, 15 engineers, 20, 50 engineers or whatever, right? It's in their best interest to have people around that are going to raise the tide around them. Okay. So what do I mean by that? When you start your career as a software engineer, you're not going to know that much, but you're going to be on a team of, say, 3, 4, 5, 8 other engineers. And you're going to have to lean on those senior engineers to actually start to learn, to actually start to be productive in the industry. Because the reality is, when you first get into the industry, you're not going to know that much. You're not going to be that productive just because you're not that experienced. Okay. So the amazing benefit of having those senior engineers, of being able to pay good talent to come in, is that they can make all your other engineers more productive. And what does other engineers being more productive do? Well, it increases business value. It cuts costs for the business. It increases revenue, and so on and so forth. And it's this upward spiral of kind of business value and profit for the business. And it's, it's a positive feedback loop. And that's why, companies are willing to go after this better engineer talent. Like in many cases, they're willing to pay above market rate because of all these reasons here. It makes the business more valuable, right? It makes it more profitable. There's a supply and demand issue. They don't want to make a bad hire, and so on and so forth. And like, on and on and on. I think at this point, I've kind of beaten the dead horse. This is why they can afford to pay these salaries here. You want to bring in a senior software engineer, you're looking at $300K here. You're looking at $400K. What else do we have here? $200K, $295, $368. Like, some of these numbers are just disgusting, right? It's just disgusting. It's like, what could you do with that amount of money, right? It's a lot of money. All right. So I think at this point, I've almost kind of covered, like, how can you position yourself to maximize this income? Well, it really depends. Are you already working a job, or are you new to the market? Okay. If you're already working your job, it's in your best interest to start to align yourself with these direct business driven initiatives, right? So if there's a project that's existing to either automate something away or to make the business more money, to get the business more leads, more sales, what have you, it's in your best interest to start to align yourself with those projects, to insert yourself into those projects and really focus on, like, how can I increase the business value here by either cutting costs or increasing revenue? Likewise here, supply versus demand. Basically, the only thing you can do here is make sure you're a good engineer, make sure you can communicate that. And the way that you actually communicate this to recruiters, to tech people, to C-suite, to CEOs, things like that, it's not about the difficulty of the technical challenges that you've solved. It's not, all right? I promise you, it's not. And that's where I think a lot of engineers get confused. It's like a lot of engineers focus on how difficult it was of a problem that they've solved in the past and what tech stack they use and this and that. But in reality, what does a business actually care about? Why are businesses, like, why do they run the business? It's to make profit, right? If you're working for a for-profit organization, the goal of the business is to make profit and to continue into the future, okay? And so if you can align yourself with that goal, you are tremendously more valuable. And that is the mindset rewrite that a lot of engineers need, in my opinion, all right? And so the hidden cost of bad hires, it depends who you are talking to, okay? If you are talking to a recruiter, if you are talking to an employee, they're optimizing for something very different, right? They're optimizing for something very different than, say, the CEO is, right? So if a recruiter is an employee and they don't necessarily get paid out on every hire they make or what have you, right? They're optimizing for something very different than the CEO is, all right? So a lot of times employees will play the game not to lose as opposed to win the game, right? Whereas the CEO wants to make more profit. So you have to have this emotional intelligence of knowing who you're speaking to, right? So, if you're speaking to a recruiter on the phone, or if you're speaking to maybe another engineer on the phone, like, their goal is to not get fired. So it's in your best interest to speak to your resume, to speak to your experience, and ensure that you are not imposing risk on, if they were to make a hiring move towards you or to recommend you, how can you align yourself in such a way that you pose literally zero risk to them, right? You're maybe not company hopping, you're not job hopping, you show your experience, like you've built the project in the language that the company is hiring for, right? And you can speak about that. You can speak from your experience on that. That is one way to show that, hey, I'm pretty confident in this hire. This recruiter is willing to take a chance on you. Now, if you're speaking to a CEO, you're speaking to a CTO, somebody with equity in the business that, has direct financial incentive in making the business more profitable, in making sure that, the equity value, the enterprise value of the business is increasing as a result of hiring you, right? Make sure you're speaking to, say, the business metrics of what you've done or what you can do that can increase this business value up here, right? So for example, a CEO, let's say, you've solved some crazy tech challenges in the past and it was such a great problem and it was so challenging for you and you eventually overcame the issue and then, you solved a technical challenge. And let's say you have that project A, and then you have project B, where at your last company, you made the company another $5 million a year. What are you going to talk about? The one you want to talk about, which is like the technical challenge, or the one that's, made the business a lot more money, but you weren't that excited about, right? Well, the reality is, if you can speak to something like, oh, you made them a lot of money, what CEO would not want you on their team, right? An engineer who's actually thinking about the monetary impact, the business impact of what it is they're building, right? That is tremendously more valuable to a CEO who's constantly thinking about, pleasing their investors, making more money, how much money is going to get in their pocket, right? If you can serve their interest, all of a sudden they're going to take a much greater liking to you. All right. This has been my experience and it's proven over and over again of like, you have to understand who you're talking to. And if you understand what it is they're optimizing for, even if subconsciously, you can get much better results out of your hiring, out of your conversations or what have you. Right. So that's kind of the summary of this hidden cost of bad hires. And then the other is like, as an entry level employee, this is not going to matter so much for you. And I'm assuming if you're watching this video, odds are you're maybe thinking about getting into this career, maybe you're an entry level employee, or maybe you're just learning how to code or, whatever. So maybe this one doesn't matter as much to you, but again, if you're speaking to a CEO, if you're speaking to a recruiter and you have experience working with teams, if you have experience, in a team setting, making others around you better, being a leader, things like this, it's like, those are valuable skills and companies love that kind of stuff. All right. So this is kind of the summary of how you can position yourself to maximize income. You have to think from the perspective of other people's needs, right? A CEO might want more money. A recruiter might want to not get fired so that they can keep a stable family life or whatever. Just put yourself in their shoes for 5 seconds and think about what it is they might want. And if you can just hand them whatever it is that they want, you might get more of what you want, which I'm assuming is more compensation, which is more income in many cases. All right. So in this video, we covered why companies can pay devs this much money, 192 grand plus. We talked about how much major tech companies can pay for these entry level roles. We talked about why they can afford to pay so much and how you can position yourself to actually maximize your own personal income, right? So that you can live a great life. Now, if you're working in a career right now, maybe it's dead end, maybe you want to earn more money, maybe you want to earn an additional income outside of work, right? I can help you do that. I've put together a website called frontendfuture.com. If you go to that website, there is a free training on that website that you can go and watch completely for free, no questions asked. And if you want to take it to the next step, if you want to actually break into this industry, to go faster, if you want me to actually hold your hand to get into this industry and start earning that 6-figure income, to start earning that remote income, go ahead and apply online, see if you qualify. And, if you qualify, we'll get on the phone, we'll have a conversation together and see if I can actually hold your hand and guarantee that you get into this industry. Now, if you're interested in that kind of thing, go ahead and go to frontendfuture.com, or I've included a link down below. You can go ahead and click that in the description. Now, if that's not you, totally ignore what I just said. And I appreciate you watching the video. Again, my name is Jake. I'm an ex-Amazon engineer, and my goal is to help you be the best coder that you can, to help you go and change your life making this kind of money here. All right. So I appreciate you watching the video and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.